Everybody, welcome back to House Church. Again, my name is William Colley, and I'm here with your lead pastor, Benjamin Kempfer. How you doing, bud?
Wonderful. Blessings, my people.
Awesome. Well, so glad you are here with us, and we're excited about today. Last week, we talked about the gospel, being able to articulate the gospel, and really the foundation of these 4 weeks, which is to give you the practical tools to be able to share the gospel.
Yeah. And so this week, what we wanted to do is, so the goal, and this is kind of what gets lost, right? A lot of times we say just kind of like you said it, which we've said intentionally the last couple of times, but it's to share the gospel, right? The emphasis on that is that I am sharing, right? I'm telling somebody this thing, and eventually the information has to come across.
Sure.
What I want to do though is to reframe this. Because the goal is simply to help someone become a Christian, right? To take someone who doesn't have faith and help them to place their faith, hope, and trust in Jesus as Lord and Savior. And so the assumption is, so I have to go tell them something. I want to reframe that because I think that's actually not helpful. How I think about this, and for me, this has been the most helpful way to make it accessible is I'm simply trying to help somebody take one step closer to faith, right? So it's not my job to say, hey, this is how you become a Christian in totality of one conversation, because honestly, as adults, it's incredibly difficult to do. What I feel a responsibility for is to simply help someone take one step closer in faith. And as you can imagine, there is a ton of ways to do that, right? And so how I would maybe reframe this is, we think about sharing our faith or evangelism as I'm the keynote speaker. How I like to think about it is I'm the therapist. I want to ask questions. I want to be interested in your story, interested in what's going on as one of the tools that I use to help someone to take one step closer. How can I help you to take one step closer if I don't know where you are? And so it's...
Yeah, to back up real quick, when you say not the keynote speaker, but the therapist, what is the difference? What are you kind of saying is the difference between those two, the approach to that?
Yeah, so a keynote speaker says, this is what you should know. This is what you should know. A good therapist, they might know where you need to go, but they're going to lead you on a path of discovering for yourself. So when we normally force information on somebody, this is what you should know, this is what you should know, this is what you should believe, as opposed to saying, okay, this is where you, asking questions that help to understand where the person is. I can't help you to take one step closer until I know where that first step is, where you are, right? So how I would, here, let me give you another illustration for this. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to give you tools. That's all these are. These are just tools. But the idea is that you would begin to think about them and utilize them, implement them in ways that are appropriate. So as a way of illustration, if evangelism were a house...
This guy got the tool bag.
Big time. You call me a tool bag?
Yeah.
Anyway, so a lot of times we'll say, okay, in evangelism here is presenting the gospel. Here is sharing your testimony, type of a thing. And if we were going to build a house, we would never say, okay, this is the only way you could build a house. Build an entire house with just a hammer. There's electrical, there's plumbing, there's HVAC, there's all kinds of stuff.
As we know with the building construction.
Building campaign for the future.
There's microchips.
Yeah.
Very important.
Very important. Very supply and demand, difficult right now. Yeah. Anyways, so you've got a wrench, perhaps. You've got a little screwdriver. Yeah,
Okay.
Look at this guy. What a builder. Call him Bob. And then you've got the big dog, the
charging everything.
Yeah, charged and ready to go. So so the idea behind this is, right, you're utilizing the right tools to build the thing. If you're trying to build a deck versus if you're trying to lay some plumbing versus if you're trying to run some electrical, right, you're going to use a different tool for that thing. So the point is to say, I need to know where you are and how I need to help to build this to take one step closer. And again, normally what we do is we just give somebody a hammer and say, go for it. Right? Just, swing away and hope you hit something and maybe salvation happens.
The hammer being what, like one way to present?
It's, just go and share your testimony, share your story, which is a big part, obviously. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to lead into that to say that this is a tool, not the only tool.
Gotcha.
This isn't the only way to do this.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think it's important because it's a great tool, but it's not the only tool.
Yeah.
And some of us, maybe that tool is a little more natural, right? It's a little easier for us to use that. Swing a hammer, we're not gonna hit our finger every time we start off, but and some of it's gonna be a little bit trickier, right?
Yeah.
You take getting used to it.
Everybody's lost a couple nails at swinging a hammer, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think the starting point for understanding how to share your testimony specifically. Yeah. So a testimony is basically your story. One of the verses, the jumping off points of this is John chapter 1, First John, chapter 1, verse 1. And he leads into the entire book by saying, that which is from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at, and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. In other words, what I'm about to tell you is not just a hope and hope. This is my experience. This is the power of story, right? Is this the power of this is my experience. This is what I have seen. This is what I have heard. This is what I have touched. This is what I have felt, which takes it into a more personal thing than just this is what you should believe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it's huge. Yeah, I think it's great. And there's a level of opening up, right? And a level of, hey, this is where I was at, and this is where I've come from.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, 100%. And so the framework for this is just that. It's to say, okay, and this is, for everybody listening, this is the framework that we want to give to you so that you can take this with you. It's what was your life like before Jesus? What was your life like, and how did you come to know Jesus? And then what was your life like after Jesus, right? So before Jesus, how did you come to know Jesus? And then after you've come to know Jesus. And let me give you a couple just kind of thoughts about each one of those, as I think maybe some pitfalls. So before knowing Jesus, the tendency in this is to spend too long on it and to over glorify the sin in it. And we've all been there where maybe somebody was giving their testimony at church and they're talking about how bad they were. And they almost look at it with like a fondness of like, oh man, we used to do this and we used to do that. And we were crazy. It's like, so you want to do that again. That's how I'm interpreting that, right?
Yeah.
If I was going to tell you about the best meal I ever had, I would tell you about the meal. That would be the substance of what I was talking about, not how hungry I was walking into the restaurant. Now, I might give you that for context, right?
Sure.
But for us, we made that the bulk of the story, that this is everything, right? And so I think it's good to share and to have appropriate boundaries around that sharing, though, and say, man, this is who I was. So, quickly, for me, before I knew Jesus, I was around church, but it wasn't really personal for me. It was common in our household, but we weren't every Sunday. We would sometimes go months without going.
Yeah.
I never really had a problem with the hypocrisy or anything like that in the church. I honestly just saw drugs, sports, girls, and that looked like way more fun than anything else. And so that's what I ran after for a long time. Now, notice when I said that, I did not go into excruciating detail. I didn't say what drugs, what sports, what girls, because I was in middle school and there probably were none. But but I don't go into a ton of detail. But I just say here's what I felt and here's what I jumped into off of that.
Well, I think what's key there is you're sharing. Hey, this was before I met Christ. This is my life before I met Christ. But also like this is what I was feeling. This is what I was experiencing.
Yes.
Right. It wasn't just I'm glorified. I'm hyping up what my life used to look like, but at the same time, I'm sharing and there was this sense of like loneliness, this void that was still there, right? Even in all of that.
So for me, after coming to know Christ, my after for the experience of my story has been one that is certainly not perfect, but it is filled with purpose, and peace. So life is as with everybody, right? It has its ups and downs, and there's struggles, and there's times where you feel victorious over sin. There's times where you feel like you really struggle with it. I have had the blessing to be able to do a lot and to accomplish a lot and to see a lot and have a wonderful, family, all this stuff. I can't imagine the void that would be inside if I didn't have Jesus anchoring me, and especially in the low times, knowing that this life is not all there is to life, right? Now, with what I just did there, which is what I would say is the tip for the, there's the, before Christ, how I can enter Christ after, is our tendency is to over glorify what happens after. It's to over glorify and say, and man, life has been awesome ever since. It's been incredible and I don't struggle with this anymore. It's like, no, people want what's real when you're sharing your story.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you're being very clear on the fact that like, hey, even though I struggle in certain areas. There's areas of sin that I'm constantly growing and getting past. And I'm becoming more like Christ, even though all those things happen, and I still have the regular struggles of, kids getting sick and house issues or whatever the case, job stuff, whatever.
100%.
All those things still
Pork
happen.
market being astronomically high for a crazy amount of time.
But I'm still I'm grounded in the reality that Jesus died for me, and because of that, it's going to be okay.
Right. It gives me what I have on planet Earth, and it gives me a hope for a better future. And for this, by the way, this layout, this before I came to know Jesus, how I came to know Jesus, and life since Jesus.
Yeah.
Acts chapter 26 it's one of my favorite parts to take this from. There's a number of different places where this is modeled in the Bible. Acts 26, you can read it for yourself, but Paul is talking to Agrippa, and Paul is giving a defense kind of for where he is, why he is, who he is. In verses 4 through 11, he goes through all of the things that was before, right? Here's how I used to be. 12 through 20, he goes through, and here's how I came to know Christ. Here was my experience. And then 21 through 23, he goes through and says, this is what my life is like after. So I would say, go take that, read that. Paul, obviously, no surprise, is the master at doing this. But I think it's a beautiful documentation of how Paul in the early church did that, but in a way that's still really helpful and I think clear and clarifying for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So here's what we want you to do right now in your home church. We just want you to take a couple minutes and we just want you to write out your story. What was your life like before Christ? How did you meet Christ? How did you accept Christ into your life? And then after, what does your life look like? And I want you to write it just like you're sharing with somebody. So just take a couple minutes, write those things down, and we'll come back in a little bit. All right, everybody, welcome back. Just like we did last week, we're actually, after this segment, we're going to actually break up into groups of 2 or 3, and we're going to practice sharing our story. And the reason that is, just like last week, this is our safe place. This is a safe place for us to do this, and a place where we can come together and practice kind of sharing our gospel story.
Yeah, and I would say when we get to that, we're going to talk about a few things before that. But when we get to that, again, just like Paul, he's just saying, man, pray that I make it clear. Paul in Colossians, we talked about this last week.
Yeah.
But I would say in that desire for clarity, again, people want a story that is real more than they want a story that's well articulated, right? You can use the best words, but if they feel like they're not talking to a real person. So honestly, sometimes the more clunky it is, the more that you're trying to figure out how to put stuff into words, it can actually come across as genuine.
Yeah.
So
that's good. That's really good. Why don't you tell us a little bit, some ways that we can maybe connect our story to somebody else?
Yeah. So I want to take what we normally think about this. So this is how I actually do a story. It's not wildly uncommon that I say, let me share with you my story, my testimony.
Sure.
At times when people ask something specifically, if I'm being honest, the primary way I use my story has nothing to do with my story. It has everything to do with your story. And what I mean by that is, again, my agenda is simply to help you to take one step closer to faith, right?
Yeah.
Now, the reason my story is important is because there's similarities between our stories, because we are both people. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you look like, how much you make, what you do. Like, we are people, we have fears, we have emotions, we have all of these things that are kind of commingling that make us complex beings. Well, the idea behind this is to say, I need to know my story well to have empathy as I listen to your story, because I want to connect my story to your story, right? Not so that you're like, oh, here's my story, but you're talking about something that you dealt with, something that you're struggling with right now, a concept, an idea of faith. So part of my story, again, if I was going to take a little bit different version of it, would be that I went to Florida State and got my degree in religion, right? Didn't go to the typical Bible college. As a part of it, we had to learn all of the different aspects of lots of different faiths, lots of different religious texts, right? So I'm talking to somebody who has questions, and their hesitancy is, well, so it seems like the only reason that people believe this is because of the fact that they were told to believe this is the only thing I know. I said, man, that's an awesome point. And honestly, I think that more Christians should be more aware and educated in other faiths and other beliefs. One of the things I really appreciate was the fact that I went to Florida State. Yeah. And it was more so taught what you shouldn't believe than what you should believe, right? Now, I'm not even going to say, so this is what I think you should believe. I'm just acknowledging the fact that, yes, that exists. That's actually a part of my story too, right? Now, I'm not saying, now here's what you should believe instead. In fact, most times I don't even answer it. I think that's the expectation. Oh, he's going to say this is what you should believe and think. But for me, I just, I'm not threatened. I don't feel like I need to force information. If you ask, I'll tell you. But that to say, what I'm actually doing is I am listening, because I want to say, what's in your story? Yeah. Everybody wants to tell their story. Everybody's favorite subject is themselves. Inside of that, I'm going to listen, but they also want someone who's like them. Yeah. And so when you get to the point where they say the thing and you're just like, man, I 100% understand that. I've been there, me too type of a moment. Like that's when people really connect on an interpersonal level. So that to say, it's hard to connect your story with someone else's story if you're not very familiar with your story and how you would talk about it anyway. So in other words, as we're talking about testimonies, I wouldn't necessarily think of my testimony as something I have to share so much as something I have to listen to actively as I'm listening to your story to find commonalities and common bonds to bridge the gap between where we are, right? And if I can have the empathy, the awareness, the listening, the learning to hear your story, to be familiar with my story and connect the two stories together, now we're on the same story, right? I think it makes it much more accessible and palatable for people, because we're not really talking about me, we're talking about you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and we'll get to that later on, of just kind of like asking the questions and kind of how to have those types of conversations to get to that. But if you don't have if your story is not clear to yourself, you don't have that to glean on and to remember and everything there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. And so what I'd say is, in a second, we're going to have everybody grab one person, maybe two people. Be conscious of your host home. Please don't make this take forever. We would love for you to, but be conscious. As you're sharing your story, share it again from a place of realness and genuineness. And as you're listening to someone else's story, I want you to actively listen for places where their story and your story intersect. I'm telling you, you're going to find them. And so when I sit down with coffee with somebody, I'm just like, man, tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
Where are you from? What did you do? What do you do? How'd you get interested in that? And the whole time, all I'm doing is mining for similarities and common bonds between us. So that way, when we actually get into a meaningful, substantive conversation, there's more similarities than there are differences. And I'm a person just like you, but this is the conclusion I've come to about Jesus as Lord and Savior.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, just grab somebody right now. You guys practice sharing your story, and we will see you guys next week.